Welcome to today's episode on cybersecurity and data privacy. I'm Harsha Vasher, CEO of Cat Labs. I'm so delighted to be joined today by data and privacy expert, CEO of Binary Tattoo, Cat Coode. Thank you so much for joining. How are you today, Cat?
I'm great, thanks. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you on a topic we both are passionate about. But before we get started, tell us about your journey, how you started Binary Tattoo.
So I was a software engineer and architect for a very long time at BlackBerry when it was still RIM. And I came up in this world where security and privacy were first before anything else. And I watched the development of a new product with that in mind. I left RIM 7 years ago to start Binary Tattoo. So binary for the language of all things digital, and tattoo for the permanence of everything we're putting online. The reason I wanted to do the company was to help other people understand privacy. So in the last decade, we've had Facebook and Google and all these companies that are taking our data and using it as payment, and very few people really understand the extent to how that works. So the intention of Binary Tattoo was to have people understand the permanence and also the prevalence and how far reaching this data goes. And now I do a lot of actual data privacy compliance regulations like GDPR and PIPEDA and CCPA, and helping companies understand why putting, again, compliance regulations at the foundation for privacy is actually going to help you build a better product and service.
That's really inspiring. And I can very well relate to this name, Binary Tattoo. You know, with COVID-19, like we are now surrounded by technology. We were, but COVID-19 has made it like more connected to technology and this remote working, online shopping. And we have seen an increase in online shopping for everything, right? From grocery to clothes to furniture, like everything. So what are some of the ways by which we can avoid online tracking while browsing?
Yeah, so this, again, like you said, this has been happening for a long time. You and I both know, but hackers have always been out there, but they are certainly trying to take advantage of a bad situation and make it worse. There are a lot of sites right now I think people need to be careful of and try not to use sites that might be new and that they may have not seen before. Mm-hmm. So I know that's above and beyond tracking, but just from that perspective, because you had said online shopping. And so I like to stick to things like Etsy and Amazon and places I know, and not start with new sites that I might be unfamiliar with. So from a tracking perspective, all the websites use cookies. With data privacy regulations, you're supposed to be asked now whether or not you're okay with being tracked by cookies. And in some cases, the service won't allow you to use it without it. And then that's a choice you have to make. Do you want your data tracked? Do you want to use the service? And that's the cost of the service. It's like saying it's a $10 service and you're like, that's too much money for me, then move on. In other cases, you can turn off the cookies on your browser. There are ways to turn off that tracking. So the way cookies work, the easiest example, if you're not familiar with them, is when you go to a site like Amazon and you put things in your cart and then you leave and then you come back again. It's the cookie that remembers what you've done on that site, and it tracks it. And in this day and age, like you said, with so much technology, is the various companies are sharing those cookies and that information from site to site. So one tip that people could do right now is to close accounts, not just like close the window, but actually close accounts if you're going from one place to another. So if you're in Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever you're in, and you want to go into a payment site like Amazon or groceries, close the other account down, log out of it. Otherwise, those two sites are talking to each other while you're online. So making sure that you're not mixing accounts by closing one down and then going to the other.
That's a really useful tips, because you know what? People are always in a habit of saving passwords on their computer and all their accounts are logged in, be it your laptop or your mobile phone. Yes. So you create a lot of awareness about data privacy and personal information. And Binary Tattoo also provides training on this. So what kind of trainings are important for an organization to help their staff understand the importance of data privacy practices?
So a lot there, they still say the biggest way into a company right now is via social engineering or human error. Some people say human ignorance. I just like to say human mistake. It's not often intentional, right? It's not often something we mean to do as human beings, but that is, you can put all the firewalls in the world, but if somebody leaves a door open, someone else can walk in. And so it is important that employees are aware of and understand how hackers actually get into companies. It's more than just saying, hey, you need to protect the privacy. It's making them aware that they actually have a role to play, and it's important for them to be a part. So creating that culture in your company to say, you know, I'm not going to get mad at you if you've clicked on a link that you shouldn't have clicked on. I want you to come tell me about it so we can help mitigate that problem. Creating that culture where people know they can report problems if they think there's phishing scams, which is where the emails come in and they appear to be from within the company and they're not. Or if now that everyone's using laptops at home, which is another issue, if people are using their own laptops and visiting a malicious website or downloading a malicious app, then they could actually be putting their company at risk. So understanding that it's their job to protect the hardware that their stuff is on. And even again, if you're logging in on a piece of hardware and your kids have access to that computer, or your partner or spouse or roommate has access to that computer, log out of your account, create separate accounts for that. And so helping individuals understand that that's their role to play. And then again, very, very critical that they have a role to report it when they see it, and they won't be punished for that. That's celebrated.
Yes, true. Like, it's really important to separate your home and your work laptops. But if you have one, those are really useful tips to follow to make sure your work is safe. And as you know, it's the right time for organizations to invest in cyber awareness training instead of blaming or pointing fingers at their employees.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So as you know, at KTech Labs, we work on protecting smart buildings and building systems like HVAC, your cameras and lighting. And we have often seen these systems are being connected with platforms that capture consumption data, like your temperature settings, your occupancy data, your metering data. So though this kind of data is not your personal information, but I'm really keen to know what kind of standards should be followed to protect this data?
So that's a really tough one, because as you and I have talked about too, IoT doesn't really have standards, right? So when people are putting in new tools and they're going, you can get Internet of Things devices from Canadian Tire, from Home Depot, and bring them home and then just connect them up and be off and running with a device that's not standardized at all. So understanding that first, that again, the onus is on you if you're putting something into your system to understand the system and not assume the system is at some kind of standard that you can comply with. It's interesting you say like certain things like video capture, like if you have a video camera at the door of your company, that is actually personally identifiable information, right? So that is information. There are regulations around what can be captured and for what purpose. If you have a business reason to capture identifiable information, remote access systems is a great example of people coming in and out, or if there's one individual in an office and you said like there's a heat sensor and you know when that person's in or not in that office, that is information about their geographical whereabouts. And if you have business reason to tie that back to who they are and you can acknowledge that, you can collect that information. But if you are collecting it, users typically, unless it's a public space, you do need consent from users to understand that you are collecting any identifiable information about them.
Okay. So though we are thinking that we are capturing consumption, it could be a personal identifiable information. That's a good.
It could be, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I know you talk a lot about standards, and in Europe we have GDPR, and then we have PIPEDA. So what is PIPEDA and how does it impact Canadian companies?
So PIPEDA is the Personal Information Protection Electronic Documents Act, which is the whole long thing. It is actually, it's very dated. So PIPEDA it's a privacy regulation that came into play. If you're thinking dental office and doctor's offices with those little file folders behind you, PIPEDA protect the information when it originally went digital from not being digital. It was all instituted before we really had widespread internet use and cloud. So a lot of the regulations on there are very much privacy based, but not necessarily internet based. And because of that, and because it's dated, sometimes people don't give it the credit it needs. GDPR is newer, and we are in Canada looking to move towards something. They've talked about the digital charter that should be coming down the line. I'm sure it's postponed now because of what's going on, but we will have a more updated system about the way we collect personal information. But the regulation around PIPEDA is similar in the sense that you can only collect information that's required for your business. Users have to be aware of what information you're collecting and how you're using it. Individuals also have to be able to alter that information if it's incorrect. And the only thing GDPR really has that we don't, and California has as well, is the ability to delete yourself from a system. Okay. So at this point, an Canadian individual can't say, hey, I don't want to be in your system anymore, take me out. But all the other things stand the same. We also have a wonderful Dr. Ann Kavukian, who is Canadian, instituted privacy by design. That is part of PIPEDA, it's part of GDPR. It's now a global standard, and it's really about putting privacy first in the design of your systems and your products to ensure that it's called the zero sum, like there's no sacrifice to security for privacy and privacy for security. They are both in there.
Okay, so it's kind of related to understand what your business needs, and then based on that, collect the information.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so it might be great statistical data to know how old someone is or what gender they identify with, but if that's not actually necessary to the product, I was saying to someone else, my kid had made some science fair, and the science fair asked for the gender. And so I was looking at that, and I'm like, I guess they probably want statistical data on how many girls versus boys or who's actually going to the science fair. But I'm like, that's not necessary data to provide for this purpose. That's just statistical data. So you have to be careful. The more data you collect, the riskier it is. And so you really want to limit that personal data and only collect what you need.
Okay, great. Now a bonus question for our audience. So, with COVID-19, schools have started online classes and kids are spending most of their time online. And as a parent, you can understand how much we are concerned about our kids' safety. So what are some of the ways by which parents can ensure their kids are safe while browsing internet?
Oh, so this is a hard one. One of the biggest things is only connecting with people you know in real life. Kids have a tendency to broaden their networks. If they're on anonymous websites and they're talking about things that are not personal, like I always use the example of something like Reddit, or a lot of kids play online gaming. If you're talking about the strategy for the game you're in, talk about the strategy for the game you're in. But if you're on a site like TikTok or Snapchat where you're sharing pictures of yourself from your home, any kind of personal information, any kind of details, the only people to see that should be people you actually know. It is too easy to quickly expand that network. The example I give, because I often teach in schools still, is I've seen more 16-year-old girls in bikinis on Instagram than I ever want to see in my whole life. And they don't want me watching their photos, right? That's not, some weird 40-year-old woman is looking at my Instagram. They're hoping their friends will see it or someone else from their school might see it. But when I say that to them, when I say, if you find that creepy that I'm looking at your photos, and they do, they don't think of it that way. They think of them posting it and only interested people that they are interested in having seen it will see it. They tend to forget that posting in a public way is really global. So that really refining your audience. I know kids with my own as well, like, are really trying to connect online with friends. Using closed things like FaceTime is always better because it's just one-on-one and you're not integrating other systems and services. And then again, back to that tip of every household's different. Some of us are fortunate to have one device per person, and some of us have one device that they have to share amongst 5 people. So ensuring that everyone has their own account. And so what's happening on different accounts stays separate, and you're not integrating different people's use. Even as simple as if I had a work item open and one of my kids came in to do something on the internet, they could accidentally close what I'm using or send an email that's unfinished. So even from that perspective, making sure that everything's separated.
Those are really useful tips. I'm sure we all will benefit from this, to make sure you have separate accounts and make sure you watch your kids what they are doing online. Yes. For those who are listening in, Kat has shared so many useful tips on data privacy. Very informative and great person to follow on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for your time, Kat, and it was real pleasure speaking.
Thank you so much.
Before we sign off, I would say getting information off the internet is like taking a drink from a fire hose. So be careful what you share online. Stay safe and bye.